Welcome to the deep dive. Today, well, we're tackling something pretty big. We've got this whole stack of sources, ancient wisdom, military strategy, modern business thinking, and we're trying to synthesize it all to answer a core question.
Right. It's about how great things actually get done, isn't it? Whether it's in business or running a country or even just mastering yourself.
Especially when things are complex, uncertain, and crucially, how do you do that while keeping your integrity intact?
Yeah, that's the synthesis. Because what we're seeing in these sources is that great action and strong principles aren't separate things. They have to go together.
So we're looking at leadership, commitment, ethics.
And this idea of a higher purpose driving things, whether it's ethical, like we'll see with some companies, or strategic, or even spiritual.
And what's interesting is that sticking to that purpose often means you can't just go with the flow.
No, quite the opposite sometimes. It might mean nonconformity, maybe even pushing back hard against how things are normally done.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. Let's kick off with organizational commitment then, because that seems like the engine for everything else. We're touching on this idea of net positive leadership today. Think former Unilever CEO Paul Polman.
Ah, right. The idea that a company could actually aim to profit from fixing the world's problems instead of, causing them or just ignoring them.
Exactly. So what happens when you establish a vision that huge, and maybe not by committee, but through the sheer conviction of a few key people?
Well, that's where you really see this concept of resolute purpose play out in the real world.
Yeah.
Take the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, the USLP.
That was their big decade-long sustainability push, right?
Massive, huge goals. Have their environmental footprint double their positive social impact. And Pullman, with a couple of others like Karen Hamilton and Gavin Neath, they didn't workshop it endlessly.
They just wrote it.
Essentially, yes, they crafted the core of the plan themselves. It wasn't born out of consensus.
Wow, that really does fly in the face of typical management advice. Get buy-in first, build consensus.
Right. It seems like they basically said, here's the mountain we're climbing, now figure out how to climb it.
Must have been some skepticism internally at first.
Oh, I imagine quite a bit. The sources suggest that the real shift, the point where the whole organization started to pivot and align their own strategies to it, only happened when people realized Pullman was, and I quote, deadly serious about it.
So it took that absolute, unwavering conviction from the top.
Absolutely. Without that singular focus, that resolve, a giant company like that, it probably would have just treated it like another corporate initiative. Nice words, but no real teeth.
You mentioned resolute purpose. That term, it resonates with some of the older philosophical texts we looked at, like the Bhagavad Gita. How does that ancient idea connect here?
It connects directly. The Gita talks about the person who is resolute in purpose, having an aim that is one singular,
A focus.
as opposed to the intelligence of the irresolute, which it describes as many-branched.
Many-branched. I love that image. It just perfectly captures the feeling in so many organizations, doesn't it?
Totally. Everyone chasing slightly different goals, different metrics. This quarter's buzzword.
Leading to scattered effort, no real momentum on the big things.
Exactly. If your focus is split, that many-branched intelligence, you just don't have the concentrated energy for major achievements. So the leader's job in this view is to distill that purpose down, make it singular, uncompromising, like net positive.
And that singularity provides the backbone to withstand all the pushback and challenges.
Precisely. The market resistance, the internal politics, the sheer difficulty of it all.
Okay, so step one is that unwavering singular why from the top. But then how do you actually translate that huge vision into what people do every day across thousands of employees? That's the hard part, isn't it?
It is. That's the execution challenge. And the sources suggest it takes, radical transparency and a solid structure. This is where things like OKRs come in.
Objectives and key results.
Right. And the key shift is moving goal setting from something private, maybe just between a manager and employee, to something public, visible across the organization.
Why does making them public make such a difference?
Visibility creates accountability, social pressure even. When everyone can see the goals and see the progress or lack of it, it drives action in a way private goals often don't.
But how do you stop those public goals from just becoming dusty annual plans on a shelf, things people ignore after January?
The dual cadence. That's the critical mechanism mentioned in the sources. You have your big, maybe annual objectives, the North Star.
Okay.
But supporting those, you have much shorter term key results. Quarterly, maybe even monthly. These are the things you're tracking constantly.
So the KRs keep the pressure on, keep things moving week to week.
Exactly. They provide that quick feedback loop. Are we actually doing the things we said would lead to the objective? Are our assumptions right? It forces you to stay honest and adapt. Without that dual cadence, that resolute purpose risks becoming just, aspirational talk.
Right. Got it. So that clarity, that commitment, it then fuels actual tangible results. Which brings us back to the net positive idea. It's not just a philosophy. It's supposed to create measurable value, both for society and the business.
Yes, this is the whole value from values concept in action. And the Unilever examples are really concrete here. They show how a company can leverage its core strengths, not just donate money, but use its actual business to lift communities.
Let's get into those specifics, because that's where it gets really interesting. Using your competitive advantage for good.
Okay, so take their hygiene brands in Europe. Lysoform, Kleenex. They didn't just sell more soap, they actively partnered with schools in Greece and Italy.
Doing what exactly?
Providing hygiene material, sure, but also crucial health education. And the scale was massive. They reached something like 10 million people just through those programs.
10 million, wow.
And you see similar things elsewhere. Big hygiene education programs in Indonesia reaching millions of kids. And then there's the Ethiopian hand washing program. That one was really impactful.
Because it tackled some very serious health issues head on.
Exactly. It was directly fighting trachoma, which is a horrible preventable cause of blindness and also deadly diarrheal diseases. This isn't just corporate social responsibility tacked on the side.
It's using what they're good at, making soap, understanding hygiene, educating people to solve massive public health problems.
Right. It's literally aiming to profit by fixing the problem. That's the net positive core idea.
And this approach, focusing on values, it can even change how you deal with critics.
Right.
The animal testing example is pretty striking.
Oh, definitely. That was a huge long-term effort and incredibly complex. You had this situation where many companies, Unilever included, had stopped testing on animals voluntarily years ago.
But certain major markets still required it by law.
Exactly. Big ones like China and Russia. So companies face this awful choice, either follow your global ethical standards or access these massive consumer markets.
A real bind.
Unilever decided not to just accept that status quo. They didn't just lobby. They got deeply involved within China and Russia to help change the regulations.
So they worked to change the system itself.
Yes, and crucially, at the same time, they invested in and promoted alternative, non-animal testing methods, showing there was a viable scientific alternative. The result, millions of animals saved globally.
And the business payoff.
Huge. Their commitment was so clear and sustained that it completely changed their relationship with PETA.
People for the ethical treatment of animals, they were a major critic before, weren't they?
A very powerful, very vocal critic. But seeing Unilever's genuine effort, PETA shifted from being an antagonist to becoming an ally.
How did that translate into business value?
PETA granted Unilever the right to use their cruelty-free bunny logo on major global brands. Think Dove, Simple, St. Ives. That's a label a growing number of consumers actively look for.
So attracting customers who care about ethics.
Directly. Tangible value generated straight from ethical action. That's the flywheel effect in practice, like Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great.
Explain that flywheel idea again.
It's the idea that big transformations don't happen in one leap. They happen through persistent effort, pushing a giant, heavy flywheel. Each turn builds on the last.
So each success, like these hygiene programs or the PETA certifications,
Adds momentum. It proves the concept works. It gets people inside the company excited. It gets external stakeholders like customers and even former critics on board. It builds and builds.
That sounds like a virtuous cycle. But it also raises an interesting warning, doesn't it? A counterintuitive one from a completely different field, creativity, Pixar. The danger of things going too smoothly.
Yeah, this is a fascinating insight from Ed Catmull, former president of Pixar. He tells the story about the making of Toy Story 3.
Okay.
Apparently, the production was just smooth, no major blow-ups, no story crises, just steady, predictable progress.
Sounds great, right?
Sounds like every project manager an absolute dream scenario. Exactly. Until Catmull mentioned this smooth sailing to Steve Jobs, and Jobs' reaction was basically a warning. He said something like, "Watch out, that's a dangerous place to be."
Dangerous. Why would smooth progress be dangerous?
Because, as Jobs intuitively understood, and Catmull later explained, a complete lack of problems can be a sign of complacency. It can signal that you're not actually pushing any boundaries.
Ah, so you might just be executing perfectly on something safe,
Yeah.
unoriginal.
Precisely. Catmull called it the danger of craft without art. Craft is the skill, the technique. You can perfectly execute a known process. Art involves grappling with the unknown, taking real risks, finding something genuinely new.
So if everything's smooth, maybe you're just applying expert craft to something derivative, just rearranging the same old pieces.
Right. You get the illusion of creativity, but the result is mediocrity. And the sources warn that this desire for minimal risk, this urge for predictability, it can infect entire companies.
You end up optimizing the process but losing the innovation.
Exactly. You become brilliant at repeating yesterday's solutions perfectly, but you stop solving tomorrow's actual problems.
So how does a leader, especially in a creative field, but maybe anywhere, fight that urge for safety? How do you keep the art alive alongside the craft?
By forcing deep, often uncomfortable engagement with the real world, mandating serious research. Pixar is famous for this. They didn't just look at pictures or rely on memory.
Give us some examples. What kind of research are we talking about?
They went to pretty extreme lengths. For Ratatouille, the team spent serious time inside Michelin-starred restaurant kitchens, watching, absorbing the pressure, the details.
Okay.
For Up, they actually traveled to Venezuela to experience the tepus, those incredible sheer-sided tabletop mountains, to get the scale, the feeling, the unique environment right.
Wow.
And my personal favorite, for Finding Nemo, to understand what happens when a fish goes down the drain, they toured the San Francisco sewage treatment plant.
They really needed to know if Nemo's escape was plausible.
Yeah.
That's dedication.
It's total immersion. And these weren't just fun field trips. This research happened early, and it fundamentally shaped the films. It grounded the fantasy in a believable reality.
Which then allowed for genuine creativity, not just repeating old tropes.
Exactly. They were solving real problems, artistic, technical, based on that deep research, not just shuffling familiar elements.
That idea of grappling with reality, rejecting comfortable illusions. It leads us nicely into the next big theme, how we navigate extreme uncertainty. Because if the world is fundamentally complex, relying too much on prediction and measurement can be a huge trap.
Yeah, we're stepping into the territory Nassim Nicholas Taleb explores, his critique of how we typically model risk.
His core point being that some kinds of risks just can't be measured accurately.
Especially the big, impactful, rare events, what he calls black swans living in extremistan. These aren't like predictable things that follow a nice bell curve, what he calls mediocristan.
Like human height, maybe. Most people cluster around the average.
Right. But in extremistan, think financial markets, wars, technological disruption. Things don't follow that neat pattern. You get fat tails. A single event can have an outsized, unpredictable impact.
So trying to assign precise probabilities to these fat tail risks is flawed from the start.
The measurement errors are just too massive. Treating probability like a hard, quantitative number in these domains isn't just inaccurate, it's dangerous. It's predictive hubris.
The belief that you can tame complexity if you just have enough data.
Exactly. And the evidence against this is overwhelming. Look at macroeconomic forecasting. The sources mentioned the survey of professional forecasters right before the 2007 financial crisis.
What do they predict?
Despite having access to literally tens of thousands of economic data series, armies of PhDs, just a month before the meltdown, they saw less than a 1 in 500 chance of it happening.
Wow, so more data didn't help at all.
Didn't equal foresight. Not when the system itself is complex, nonlinear, and prone to these extreme events.
Okay, so if prediction is flawed, especially for the big stuff, organizations need to shift focus from prediction and control towards what?
Adaptability.
Exactly. Radical adaptability. And this has huge implications for organizational structure, especially when things get really complex and interdependent, like in modern military operations.
You mean the problem of traditional hierarchies? The silos.
Right. Those rigid top-down structures, they just break down when different parts of the operation are inextricably linked, when success in one area depends instantly on what's happening somewhere else.
Like the classic example of keeping different special forces units, Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces in separate boxes. That only works if their missions are completely separate, right?
Which they rarely are anymore. In complex environments, that separation becomes a massive vulnerability. Information gets trapped in silos.
And the critical information is often out at the edge with the people doing the work. Precisely. Not necessarily at the top HQ, so you have to break down those vertical walls. You need mechanisms to reverse the information flow. You need to ensure that when the bottom speaks, the top actually listens, and that people across functions are talking to each other constantly.
Is there a concrete example of how military units adapted to fix this?
Yeah, there's a great one about an Army Special Forces commander. He saw this disconnect between his operators, the guys on the ground, and the intelligence analysts back at base.
The intel wasn't useful or timely or...
Often, yeah. So he did something radical. He mandated that his operators had to physically sit with the analysts, not just get briefings, but actually understand how the analysts worked, what data they used or that they struggled with.
And crucially, the operators could tell the analysts what info they actually found useful in real time.
Exactly. It wasn't about the analyst producing a perfect finished product. It was about creating a shared, constantly updated understanding of the battlefield. Everyone knee-deep in the fight all of the time, as the source puts it. Integration over separation.
That need for flexibility, for adaptable structures, it actually echoes strategic principles that go back thousands of years. Sun Tzu talks about this, doesn't he?
Absolutely. Sun Tzu has this principle about dispersal. If your enemy tries to defend everywhere because you're threatening multiple points,
They end up being weak everywhere.
exactly, their forces are spread too thin. So a key strategy is to force your opponent to disperse, creating vulnerabilities you can exploit.
That feels different from some Western military traditions, like Clausewitz, who sometimes emphasizes concentration of force.
It can seem that way. Clausewitz does argue for absolute resistance with stronger forces, often meaning concentration, closed ranks. But it's really about context. Sun Tzu is often focused on maneuver, deception, exploiting weakness. Clausewitz might be thinking about a decisive clash of main forces. The principle depends on your strength, the enemy's strength, the terrain.
Sun Tzu also talks about seizing not just any ground, but specifically what the opponent values, right? And timing it perfectly.
Yes, it's about strategic psychology. Don't just grab a hill. Make the enemy believe that hill is vital. Deceive them, lure them towards it, but make sure you get there first, ideally without a fight. It's about outthinking and outmaneuvering, not just outfighting, making an artful appointment with the enemy, as he puts it.
So the ideal general, according to these ancient strategists, needs to be adaptable, maybe a bit deceptive.
Yeah.
What else? Xenophon offers a really interesting, almost contradictory picture of command, doesn't he?
He really does. It's this fascinating duality. On one hand, Xenophon says the general must gain the affection of the troops by showing shared hardship.
Sharing the heat, the cold, the hunger.
Right, being greedy for his share of the suffering, showing empathy, proving you're in it with them. Though Xenophon adds the general's pains are perhaps lightened by glory.
Okay, so that's the relatable, inspirational leader we often talk about today.
But then Xenophon layers on something much harder edged. He says the same general, to actually win, must also be, and this is quite a list, an arch-plotter, a king of craft, full of deceits and stratagems, a cheat, a thief, and a robber.
Wow, a king of craft. That sounds challenging, especially when we're also talking about net positive leadership and integrity.
It is the central tension, isn't it?
How do you reconcile that need for strategic ruthlessness, even deception, against an opponent with the ethical demands of leadership, especially in business or civil life?
That's the critical boundary. Those tactics might be necessary, even lauded in warfare. But apply that same king of craft mindset internally, or to your customers or the public. It becomes corruption instantly.
Which brings us squarely into ethical leadership and the balance of power in non-military contexts.
And here, Cicero is uncompromising. He argues forcefully that what is expedient, what seems useful or advantageous, must be the same as what is right. There's no middle ground.
So if something looks beneficial but feels morally wrong,
Then the appearance of benefit is false. It's a deceptive illusion, and you have to reject it. True expediency can never be unethical.
he gave some pretty pointed examples from Roman life, didn't he? Like the case of the forged will.
Yes, involving Marcus Crassus and Quintus Hortensius, two prominent, generally respected figures. They inherited a significant amount of money from a will they had very strong reasons to believe was a forgery.
But they didn't forge it themselves.
No. And that was their defense, essentially. They felt conscious of no personal guilt in the act of forgery itself, but Cicero condemns them
Why, if they didn't do it?
because they passively benefited from a wrong. They didn't spurn the paltry present, as he put it. They didn't use their influence to reject the injustice. For Cicero, avoiding doing wrong isn't enough. You have a duty to actively oppose wrongdoing when you see it, especially if you benefit from it. Their inaction made them complicit.
So the expediency of getting the money was false because the act itself was rooted in injustice.
Exactly. And he gives a political example, too, with the politician Marius.
What did Marius do?
There was a popular currency decree being planned, a joint effort involving Marius and his colleagues. But Marius, seeking personal popularity, jumped the gun. He announced it unilaterally, taking all the credit.
And it worked. He got popular.
Hugely. It helped get him elected consul. But Cicero asks, was that temporary political expediency worth sacrificing his reputation as a good, collaborative leader? Was it worth the moral compromise? His answer is a clear no. The rule holds. If it's wrong, it cannot possibly be truly expedient.
This deep concern for moral structure naturally leads to thinking about governance itself. How should leaders be chosen? Aristotle weighed in on this.
Yes, Aristotle looked at different systems. He was critical of hereditary rule just based on birthright, or choosing leaders by sheer chance. He favored something more like Sparta's system, where leaders like kings or senators were effectively elected based on demonstrated merit.
Especially if a particular family consistently produced capable individuals.
Right. Merit over just lineage. His warning was that if you put insignificant people in charge of important matters, they inevitably do a lot of harm to the city-state. Competence and virtue were key.
And this idea of leaders holding power and trust, being accountable to the community, that echoes down the centuries. John Locke picks it up forcefully.
Locke is fundamental here. He insists that ultimate power always resides with the community. The people retain the supreme power to remove or change their government, their legislature.
Under what conditions?
Specifically when that government acts against the trust placed in it. If the leaders invade the people's property, try to enslave them, or impose arbitrary power, the social contract is broken. The community has the right, even the duty, to take back that power. It's the ultimate check on abuse.
Now, fast forward to modern organizations, we see different kinds of control structures, but sometimes they create similar problems, eroding trust, making people miserable. The sources talk about this armor of compliance and control.
Yeah, this is the phenomenon where organizations, often out of fear of lawsuits, regulations, getting caught doing something wrong, build up these incredibly dense layers of rules, procedures, and approvals.
The armor.
Right. And this armor, designed to prevent the worst behavior from a tiny minority, ends up suffocating everyone else. It strips work of its meaning, its context, its nuance.
Because everything becomes about following the procedure, ticking the box.
Exactly. And the motivation shifts from contributing to a larger purpose or using your judgment to simply not getting caught breaking a rule. It breeds fear, not engagement.
And the impact on creativity and productivity.
It crushes them. People feel disempowered, micromanaged, disconnected from the actual value they're creating. The sources say it leads to misery and makes people question their own abilities. You're treating the 99% of good employees as if they're the untrustworthy 1%. It's deeply counterproductive.
So if we accept that strategic maneuvering, that king of craft, might be necessary in competitive situations, we need a really clear example of how that plays out in the civic realm, maybe for public works. And Robert Moses is just the ultimate case study, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Moses is legendary for the sheer scale of his influence on New York City's infrastructure, all achieved without ever holding elected office.
And he even shaped national policy, like the Interstate Highway Act.
He drafted key parts of it. Despite famously never driving a car himself, his power came from mastering the bureaucracy, controlling public authorities, and frankly, ruthless strategy.
Let's talk about his methods. The low bridges on the Long Island parkways are notorious.
A classic example of social engineering disguised as design. He deliberately built the bridges over his parkways too low for standard public buses to pass under.
Why? What was the effect?
The effect was to exclude poor people, and disproportionately people of color who relied on buses, from easily accessing his state parks and beaches on Long Island. It effectively reserved them for more affluent, car-owning, predominantly white residents. It was structural racism built in concrete and steel.
Utterly cynical. And then there was his financial maneuvering to get these massive projects built, often against political opposition. The whipsaw technique. How did that work?
The whipsaw was brilliant in a terrifyingly manipulative way. It exploited the fear and conflicting interests of different levels of government.
Walk us through it.
Okay, so Moses needed funding from, say, both the city and the federal government. He'd go to authority, let's say the city's board of estimate, and get a partial commitment. Maybe contingent on matching funds. It wasn't the full amount, but it was something on paper.
Okay.
Then he'd immediately take that piece of paper to authority B, say Washington. He'd tell them, look, the city is on board, they've committed funds, but we need your federal money locked in now, or the whole project could fall apart.
Creating urgency, using the partial commitment as leverage.
Exactly. Once Washington made its binding commitment based on that impression, Moses would race back to authority A, the city.
And what was the message then?
Now the pressure was immense. He'd say, Washington has committed millions, but it's contingent on your final full approval right now. If you hesitate, if you block this, you will be responsible for losing all that federal money for the city.
Playing them off against each other, using the fear of losing money as the ultimate weapon.
Precisely. No mayor or board wanted to be seen as the ones who cost the city millions in federal aid. They were essentially forced, whipsawed, into giving Moses whatever he wanted. It was pure, calculated power politics to bypass democratic obstacles.
That kind of ruthless effectiveness really underscores the need for the leader's inner compass. How do you wield that kind of power, that king of craft capability, without becoming corrupted by it? This brings us back to self-reliance, integrity, inner discipline.
It absolutely does, and Emerson is incredibly forceful on this. He basically argues that society itself is constantly trying to undermine your individuality, your integrity.
Society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. Strong words.
Very strong. He says the virtue society prizes most is conformity, and self-reliance is the direct opposite. His famous line, "Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist."
So a true integrity comes from trusting your own mind above all else.
Yes. Nothing is sacred but the integrity of your own mind. You have to live from within, treating all the external stuff, the titles, the rules, the expectations as secondary, titular, and ephemeral.
And the key quality that enables this is sincerity. Not just acting right, but genuinely seeing rightly.
Exactly. Sincerity is the saving merit. Carlyle points to Dante as an example. Dante didn't just write about heaven and hell, he believed it. He saw the world as a gateway to a higher reality, and that deep, sincere conviction gave his work its power. If your inner vision is true and deeply held, your actions will reflect that, resisting external pressures.
But maintaining that inner clarity requires real effort, real self-control, especially over our own impulses. The Bhagavad Gita gets very specific about this internal management, doesn't it?
Extremely specific. It emphasizes the need to tolerate the urges of the senses' desire, anger, and to check their force before you die. Basically, get control of yourself in this lifetime. If you can do that, you're considered truly well-situated, truly happy.
And it describes a kind of chain reaction if you fail.
Yes. Unsatisfied desire breeds anger. Anger then agitates the mind, clouds your judgment, affects you physically, eyes, chest. The goal of the spiritual practitioner, the transcendentalist, is to break that chain reaction at the source by controlling the initial desire.
And it even defines mastery, the Goswami, by control over very specific things.
6 things, precisely. The urge to speak, idle talk, harsh words, the force of anger, the demands of the mind, erratic thoughts, the urges of the stomach, overeating, unhealthy eating, the urges of the genitals, improper sexual activity, and the demands of the tongue, taste, craving certain foods. Mastering these 6 is the definition of a Goswami, a master of the senses.
So internal sincerity and self-control are paramount. But then how does that internal sense of true goodness interact with external laws or social expectations? The Confucian texts offer a really interesting perspective here, sometimes prioritizing relationships over rules.
Right. There's this famous story where someone comes to Confucius boasting that in his village a son reported his own father for stealing a sheep. He presents this as an example of uprightness.
Following the law, being truthful to the authorities.
Exactly. But Confucius completely rejects this definition. He says a father covers for his son and a son covers for his father, and being true lies in this.
So, for Confucius, maintaining the core human bond, the filial piety between father and son, was a higher truth or goodness than strict adherence to the external law in that case.
That seems to be the implication. True goodness is perhaps rooted first in upholding fundamental human relationships and duties before abstract legal codes. It's a complex balance.
But what happens when these systems that are supposed to represent higher values like religion or even family become corrupted? when they're used to justify bad behavior instead of preventing it.
That's the dark side. And Frederick Douglass's experience provides a devastating critique of this. He wrote about the slaveholders he knew who were deeply religious,
And his conclusion was,
that their religion was often just a covering for the most horrid crimes. It didn't make them better. In many cases, it made them worse. He said the most religious slaveholders were frequently the meanest and most cruel.
why would that be? It seems counterintuitive.
Douglas suggests it's because their religion gave them a divine justification for their brutality. It allowed them to sanctify their own cruelty, making them feel righteous while committing terrible acts. It became a shield against genuine morality, against empathy.
A terrifying perversion of higher purpose.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to the Confucian idea of the truly exemplary person, the Junzi. It's not just about their own internal state.
It's about their impact on others.
Precisely. Confucius says the Junzi helps to bring out the best in others, but does not help to bring out the worst. The petty person, the Seren, does the opposite. They encourage or enable the worst in people.
So true leadership, true goodness, is ultimately measured by its positive influence on the community. It's about lifting others up.
It seems so. It's a kind of societal net positive impact, echoing the corporate idea we started with, but on a personal and ethical level.
What a journey through these sources. We've seen this need for a really strong singular vision, like Polman's net positive goal or Sun Tzu's strategic focus.
Yeah, that resolute purpose. But then we immediately saw the tension with the competitive need for cunning, for strategy, sometimes for that ruthless king of craft Xenophon described.
Which figures like Robert Moses exemplified, maybe to an extreme, showing the power and the danger of that craft without maybe enough ethical constraint.
Right. And balancing that required diving deep into personal integrity, self-reliance, like Emerson talked about, and that intense inner self-mastery from the Bhagavad Gita.
And always checking, as Cicero warned, that what seems expedient is actually right, avoiding self-deception.
So the big takeaway feels like true leadership has to connect action to a higher purpose, something beyond just profit or winning or smooth operations.
And part of that is being a constant learner, but as Cicero also cautioned, avoiding the trap of thinking you know things you don't, or getting obsessed with obscure, useless details. Focus on what matters.
Okay, so we've wrestled with all this complexity, organizational, strategic, ethical, internal. We've acknowledged that uncertainty is baked in, that prediction, especially of big risks, is fundamentally flawed.
Which leads to a final, maybe unsettling thought. Organizations spend so much energy building defenses against disorder. The compliance armor, the prediction models, the strategic plans.
Trying to make things safe, predictable, smooth.
But what happens when those defenses inevitably fail? When the unexpected, the truly disruptive event hits?
Maslow talked about this idea of catastrophic breakdown. It's when all the defensive efforts just collapse, maybe because the external threat is too overwhelming or the internal system was too brittle.
So if designing purely for resilience, for resisting disorder, leads to collapse when the resistance fails, what's the alternative?
Well, this points towards the idea of anti-fragility, something Taleb explores. How do you build an organization, or maybe even yourself, not just to survive disorder and breakdown, but to actually get stronger from it, to learn and adapt and gain from the chaos?
How does a leader prepare for that? Not just resilience, but anti-fragility.
That's the challenge, isn't it? How to cultivate that ability to thrive on volatility, not just endure it. That feels like the ultimate pursuit these sources push us towards. Something for all of us to think about.